The little black girl told the biker she saw a stranger pull someone behind a sealed door in the abandoned shaft. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. This is the kind of tale that will keep you at the edge of your seat, wondering what happens next. It all started on a quiet, cool evening in a town just outside of Denver, Colorado. A small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other, or so it seemed. The kind of place where nothing ever happened, until one fateful day. A little girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with dark braids and a bright yellow dress, ran frantically down the street. Her feet barely touching the ground as she sprinted toward the biker bar at the edge of town. She had no time to think. Her heart was racing, her breath came in sharp gasps, and her legs ached with each step. But she wasn't stopping. As she neared the entrance, she could feel her tears streaming down her face. She didn't care. All she could think of was getting help. Inside the dimly lit bar, a group of bikers were gathered around a table, laughing and joking about their latest ride. It was a typical evening, nothing out of the ordinary, until the door swung open. The little girl burst in, her voice trembling as she screamed for help. "Please, help me. They took my brother," she cried, her voice barely audible over the sound of the roaring motorcycles parked outside. The room went silent. All eyes turned to the young girl. The leader of the group, a tall, broad-shouldered man named Jake Bear Johnson, was the first to react. His face hardened as he stood up from the table, his leather vest creaking as he moved. The others followed suit, exchanging confused glances as they watched Bear kneel down to the little girl's level. "Calm down, sweetheart," he said gently, his deep voice softening the tension in the room. "Tell us what happened." The girl took a deep breath, wiping her tear-streaked face with the back of her hand. "I saw a man, a stranger. He pulled my brother behind a sealed door in the abandoned shaft by the old mill. I tried to stop him, but he was too strong. Please, you have to help." Bear's heart dropped into his stomach. The old mill was located on the outskirts of town, a place where no one dared go anymore. It had been abandoned for years, its walls covered in layers of dust and decay. But now, it seemed, something darker was lurking within. The bikers exchanged looks of disbelief, but it wasn't fear in their eyes. It was something else. Loyalty. The kind of loyalty that bound them together. Bear stood up, his eyes hard with determination. "All right," he said, turning to his crew. "We ride." Now, without hesitation, the group of bikers stood, their movements synchronized as they prepared to leave. They knew what this meant. They knew that protecting this little girl and her brother would come with a price. But they also knew one thing for sure. They would not back down. Not now. Not ever. As Bear led the group out the door and onto their motorcycles, the sound of their engines filled the night air, echoing down the empty streets. The journey ahead would be long, but they were ready. Ready to face whatever danger lay ahead. And when they reached the abandoned mill, they would find the truth. Together, they would make sure no one would hurt this little girl again. The promise they made that night was one they would keep, no matter what. As the roar of the engines faded into the distance, the group of bikers, their hearts set on the mission ahead, sped down the highway, their headlights slicing through the dark. The little girl's words echoed in Bear's mind. "They took my brother." Every mile felt like an eternity as the bikers pushed their motorcycles to the limit. The old mill loomed in their thoughts like a shadow, a place abandoned by time, yet now filled with an ominous new purpose. Bear's mind raced. The girl had described the man pulling her brother behind a sealed door, and the more he thought about it, the more it didn't make sense. Who would want to take a child to that place? Who was behind this? The mill had been out of commission for years, the machinery rusted and silent. Yet someone had found a way in. Someone had set up a trap. Bear tightened his grip on the handlebars, the wind whipping past him, a constant reminder that they were running out of time. They couldn't afford to be wrong. Every second counted. The group moved in perfect formation, a line of thunderous motorcycles cutting through the night, their engines a symphony of raw power. Behind him, he could hear the others, steady and focused. Diesel, Phantom, Crow, Inferno, and the rest of the crew. They weren't just bikers, they were family. And family didn't abandon one of its own. The darkness seemed to grow thicker as they neared the outskirts of town. Bear knew the area well. He had ridden these roads countless times. But tonight, everything felt different. This wasn't just another ride. This wasn't just about speed or the open road. This was about saving a child. Saving a life. The thought of a little boy locked away in a dark, cold shaft, alone and scared, made Bear's stomach twist. He thought about his own children, the ones he hadn't seen in years. If something ever happened to them, he would want someone to do whatever it took to protect them. And that's what he was doing tonight. He wasn't just going to ride by. He was going to make sure no one else had to go through what that little girl had. The old mill came into view. Its silhouette was a ghost in the night, standing tall against the sky. The gate was shut, as it had always been, but there was a new energy in the air. A strange feeling gripped Bear's chest. Something wasn't right. Bear raised his hand, signaling for the group to slow down. The sound of engines roared down to a low rumble, the bikers coming to a stop a few hundred feet away from the entrance. The mill loomed before them, dark and silent, like a fortress waiting to be breached. Bear dismounted his bike, his boots hitting the gravel with a solid thud. He turned to his crew, who were now gathered around him. "This is it," Bear said quietly, his voice calm but firm. "We go in quiet. No guns unless. We have to. We stick together, and we don't split up. We find the boy, and we get him out." There was no hesitation in the group's response. Each biker nodded, their faces set in determination. They had all been in dangerous situations before. But this was different. They were not just fighting for themselves tonight. They were fighting for a child. Bear led the way toward the entrance, his eyes scanning every corner of the abandoned property. He could hear the faint sound of the wind whistling through the broken windows of the mill, but there was no other noise. No movement. They were alone for now. The door to the mill was locked, but that didn't stop Bear. He pulled out his tools and began working on the lock. It took only a few moments before the door clicked open. They moved inside. The smell of mildew and rust filled the air as they made their way deeper into the mill. The floorboards creaked beneath their boots, and every step seemed to echo louder in the silence. The building was a maze of steel beams, abandoned machinery, and dusty corners. But Bear knew exactly where they had to go. The sealed door. The one the little girl had described. The one her brother had been dragged behind. They found it at the far end of the building. It was a heavy steel door, locked tight with a rusty bolt. Bear stepped forward and motioned for the others to keep watch. He pulled out his tools once more, and with one quick motion, the lock snapped open. The door creaked loudly as it swung open. And there, in the dim light of the abandoned mill, they saw him. The little boy. He was lying on the floor, pale and weak, but he was alive. His eyes shot open when he heard the bikers enter, and his breath caught in his throat. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. He was scared, and who could blame him? Bear rushed to his side, kneeling beside him. "Hey, little man," Bear said softly, his voice comforting. "We're here. You're safe now." The boy's eyes filled with tears as he reached out to Bear, his tiny hand trembling. "You came," the boy whispered, his voice barely a breath. "You came for me." Bear's heart tightened. This was why they did it. This was what it was all for. "We always come for family," Bear replied, picking the boy up gently. "Let's get you out of here." As Bear carried the boy to safety, the rest of the bikers kept watch, their eyes scanning every corner of the dark mill, making sure no one was left behind. The fight wasn't over yet, but this was a victory, and it felt good. I should have known something wasn't right when we stepped into that mill. The air was thick with dust and decay, the kind of stench you can't escape. As I cradled the boy in my arms, every part of me was screaming that we had to get out, but we couldn't just leave now. He was finally safe, but the night was far from over. The bikers were scanning the surroundings, each of us tense, ready for whatever came next. I'd thought the worst was behind us, but the truth hit harder than a freight train. As we made our way back to the bikes, I noticed a movement in the shadows. Something was off. It was almost like the place was alive, watching us. My instincts, honed from years on the road, kicked in. I signaled to Diesel and Crow to check the perimeter. They nodded, moving out quickly, staying in the shadows where the dark hid them from view. The boy, Marcus, was quiet now, his little head resting against my shoulder, the exhaustion from the ordeal finally taking hold. I could feel his breath steadying, but his body was still trembling. No child should have to go through something like this, I thought to myself, but it was clear that he was going to make it. At least, I hoped so. We reached the bikes, and I gently placed him on the seat of my Harley. Diesel came back first, his face grim. "We're not alone," he said, his voice low, barely a whisper against the hum of the idling bikes. I caught a glimpse of someone, moving toward the back door. My heart sank. I knew we had to move fast. The mill, though abandoned for years, had too many secrets hidden behind its crumbling walls. We weren't the only ones who knew about them. I glanced over at Phantom, who was checking his weapon, his expression hard. "We don't wait for the cops," I said firmly. "If there's someone else in there, we take them out." The others didn't argue. We were all on the same page. They knew what was at stake. Marcus needed to be protected, and so did the rest of the kids in this town. "Let's ride out," I ordered. With one swift motion, we revved our engines, and the sound echoed through the mill's yard. The wind picked up as we hit the road, the engines vibrating beneath us like a low rumble of thunder. Marcus was still leaning against me, his small hands gripping the sides of my vest as we sped away. We weren't stopping until we were miles away from that place. The thought of what could have happened to him, what could have happened to Maya, the little girl who'd led us here, made me sick to my stomach. There was no way I was letting anything happen to him. We rode in silence for a while, the wind whipping past us, the only sound the roar of the engines and the rhythmic beat of the tires on the asphalt. My mind raced, but there was no time to think. Only action. We had to make sure the boy got home, and fast. As we passed through the dark streets, I saw a familiar face in my rearview mirror, Crow. She was keeping her distance, but I could tell she was close, ready to back us up if needed. The girl had been through enough already. All of them had. Maya and Marcus had suffered more than any child ever should. We couldn't let this go. We couldn't just drop them off and forget. That's when I felt it. A vibration under my feet that wasn't from the bike. Something was off. "Check the rear," I said to Phantom, signaling behind us. Without a word, he sped ahead, his bike cutting through the wind like a blade. A few minutes later, he radioed in. "We've got company. 2 cars tailing us." My heart skipped a beat. We had to act fast. I pulled to the side, waiting for the others to catch up. "It's not just us anymore," I muttered under my breath. "Let's make sure Marcus and Maya get the protection they need." We weren't about to let anyone get in our way now. The cars were closing in. I could hear the engines revving behind us, gaining speed. I gritted my teeth. No one was taking that boy from us. I signaled the group to split into 2 teams. Bear would take the lead, while Diesel and Crow flanked us from the sides. I'd hold the rear. We couldn't let these guys get any closer. The streetlights flickered as we sped through the night, the tension rising with every passing second. The road ahead was dark and winding, but we had the advantage. The cars behind us were trying to catch up, but they didn't know the streets like we did. We did this every day. This was our home turf, and we weren't going to let anyone take it from us. As the chase continued, I could feel my grip tightening on the handlebars. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. These weren't just bikers on a joyride. This was family protecting family. We were going to make sure no one messed with that, no matter the cost. The sound of the engines behind us grew louder, and I could see the headlights getting closer. They were gaining on us. I took a sharp turn, hoping to lose them in the winding roads. But as I looked ahead, my heart stopped. There was a roadblock ahead. The road was blocked off, and the only way out was a narrow alley. I pushed the throttle hard, revving my engine. It was a risky move, but it was the only shot we had. The alley was tight, but I wasn't going to let that stop me. I took the lead, speeding through the alley with the others close behind me. We had to shake them off, or we'd be trapped. We were so close. We could feel it. Victory was within reach. I could feel the adrenaline pumping through my veins as I pushed the throttle even harder, the roar of the engines echoing in the night. The alley was narrow, too narrow for comfort, but I knew I had to risk it. The sound of screeching tires behind us told me the cars were still right on our tail, and the headlights were blinding as they followed our every move. The alley stretched ahead, but with every turn, I could feel the pressure building. We needed to lose them. We needed to shake them off before they boxed us in. Diesel was right on my tail, his large form cutting through the darkness, but we had to get rid of the cars chasing us. They were faster, and they had the advantage in open spaces. The alley was our only shot. I could feel the air growing colder as the buildings closed in on both sides. The streetlights above flickered, casting long shadows that danced over the pavement. Every second felt like a lifetime. The alley twisted up ahead, and I pushed the bike harder, leaning into the turn. The back tire skidded for a split second, but I corrected it, keeping my focus sharp. Diesel and Crow followed suit, their bikes humming like an army of steel wolves. I glanced behind me, seeing the first car barely squeezing through the narrow passage. We had to move faster. Up ahead, I saw the alley open up slightly, offering a small chance of escape. The thought of finally losing them, the thought of getting Marcus and Maya to safety, pushed me to accelerate. The headlights of the first car were now dangerously close, but I didn't flinch. This was the moment we'd been waiting for. I leaned forward, feeling the wind bite into my face, the sound of the engines roaring louder in my ears. Then, just as I thought we might lose them, I heard a screech, a loud, terrifying sound. I turned just in time to see the second car, trying to force its way through the alley. It was too big, too clumsy for this kind of maneuver. The driver was pushing it too hard. The car fishtailed, its rear end swinging wildly. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. I could hear the car's tires screeching as it tried to regain control, but it was too late. The car slammed into the wall of the alley, sending a spray of debris into the air. The sound of metal scraping against concrete was deafening. I didn't wait to see what happened next. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, pushing harder, faster. We couldn't afford to slow down. As we approached the end of the alley, I saw the opening ahead. The road was clear. It was our chance to break free. I twisted the throttle again, feeling the bike surge beneath me as I shot forward. Behind me, I heard the crash of the second car slamming into the alley wall. Its pursuit stopped dead in its tracks. We had a moment. We had a chance to escape. The open road was in front of us. It was time to make our move. We burst out of the alley into the main street, the sound of our engines filling the air. I glanced over at Diesel and Crow, signaling them to split up. We needed to make sure no one was following us. Diesel took the left, Crow took the right, and I took the center, speeding down the street at full throttle. The wind was like a blast of ice against my face, but it felt good. It felt like freedom. The danger wasn't over yet, but for the first time tonight, I felt like we were in control. We were getting Marcus and Maya out of here, and nothing was going to stop us. As we reached the outskirts of town, I felt a sense of relief, but only for a moment. We weren't safe yet. There were still people after us, people who wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. But we were stronger than that. We were family. We were bikers. And no one messes with family. We made a left turn, cutting through the quieter parts of town, the streets empty at this time of night. I checked my rearview mirror one last time, making sure we hadn't been followed. The road was clear, but I knew we couldn't let our guard down. We needed to get Marcus and Maya to safety. We needed to find a place to lay low. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Forge. "I'm waiting for you. The rest of the crew is here. Come to the old garage. We'll get them out of town safely." I nodded to myself, relieved that Forge and the rest of the crew had made it. We were almost there. It wasn't much farther now. We could see the lights of the garage in the distance, and I knew we were almost home. The bikes roared as we sped toward the garage, and the moment we arrived, I saw the others already standing by, ready to take action. It was over for tonight. The boys and girls were safe. But the battle wasn't done. It would never be done, not until every single one of us was safe. And we'd do whatever it took to make sure that happened. No one was going to hurt Marcus and Maya again. Not on our watch. I pulled up to the garage, the familiar sounds of engines and laughter filling the air as the rest of the crew stood waiting. We had made it. The adrenaline was still running high in my veins, but it was slowly starting to fade as we came to a stop. The first thing I did was look over at Marcus. He was sitting on the back of my bike, his small form still trembling, but the look of relief on his face told me everything I needed to know. He was safe. The second thing I did was glance at Maya. She had been through just as much, and the fear still lingered in her eyes, but I could tell she was starting to relax now that we were away from the mill. Bear was the first to dismount from his bike. "We've got to get them somewhere safe. No time to waste," he said, his voice calm but firm. I nodded in agreement, turning my attention back to Marcus. "You okay, kid?" I asked, my voice softer than I'd intended. Marcus looked up at me, his wide eyes filled with uncertainty, but he nodded slowly. "I'm okay. Just tired." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, and it broke my heart. He had been through too much for one night. Too much for one lifetime. As I lifted him off the bike, the sound of footsteps drew my attention. I turned to see Forge walking over, his expression unreadable, but his eyes focused on Marcus and Maya. He gave a quick nod, signaling that everything was under control. We weren't done yet, but at least for now, we had won. The rest of the crew was already gathering around, their eyes scanning the area, making sure no one was following us. Diesel was on the lookout, his eyes darting between the buildings, while Crow and Phantom kept their distance, ready to act at a moment's notice. I walked over to Forge, who was pulling out his phone. "We need to make sure they're not tracking us," he said, his voice low. "I'll make a few calls, get some backup." I didn't argue. Forge had always been the one to think ahead, the one who kept a cool head when things got chaotic. I glanced back at Maya and Marcus, who were sitting on the hood of one of the bikes, still shaken but slowly starting to understand that they were safe. I could see Maya clinging to her brother, her small hands gripping his shirt as though she were afraid he might disappear again. It hurt to see them like this, but at least they were together. I walked over to them, kneeling down in front of Maya. "Hey, you're safe now. No one's going to hurt you again," I said gently, giving her a reassuring smile. She looked up at me, her wide eyes full of fear, but she managed to nod. "Will we ever go home?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Home," I repeated. "It might not be the same, but you'll always have a place with us. This is your family now. You're not alone." Marcus gave me a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a child who had seen too much, too soon. The smile of someone who wasn't sure if they could believe in safety anymore. But I couldn't blame him. He had every right to feel that way. After a few more minutes, Forge finished his call. "We're set," he said, walking over to us. "We've got a place for them to stay, a safe house upstate. We leave tonight." "Good," I said, nodding. "We need to get them as far away from here as possible." The rest of the crew gathered around, and we all agreed on the plan. We would ride out as soon as possible, making sure to avoid any roads where we might be spotted. I knew the journey wouldn't be easy. It never was. But we had to get them out of town before anyone realized what had happened. As we prepared to leave, I turned back to the kids. "We'll get you both to safety," I promised, my voice steady. Maya gave me a small nod, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I knew she wasn't ready to trust anyone yet, and who could blame her? But I was going to make sure she had a chance at a life without fear. That was the least I could do. We mounted our bikes, and I glanced back one. Last time at the garage. This was it. The moment we left, we'd be on the run. The bikers roared to life, the engines revving in unison as we hit the road once again. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the highway ahead. The wind whipped through my hair, and I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my chest loosen. We were on our way. The danger wasn't over. The road ahead was uncertain, but we would make sure that Marcus and Maya were safe. As we rode into the night, the sound of the engines filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like we had the power to control our own fate. The ride wasn't over, but we were getting closer to where we needed to be, and that was enough for now. I felt the rumble of the motorcycles beneath me as we cut through the night, the headlights from our bikes illuminating the winding road ahead. We had been riding for hours, and the tension in the air was thick. The sound of the engines was a constant hum, but my mind was focused entirely on the kids in the back. We had to get them to safety, but every mile we traveled brought us closer to something bigger than just a ride. I could feel it. The closer we got to the safe house, the more we were being hunted. It wasn't just about getting Marcus and Maya to safety anymore. It was about making sure no one followed us, making sure no one got caught in the crossfire. Bear, leading the pack, had already made a series of evasive maneuvers, but I knew that our time was running out. The Serpents, the gang behind all of this, were not ones to back down. They were like shadows, moving faster than we could predict, and I knew we couldn't keep running forever. I glanced back at Maya and Marcus. Maya was clutching her brother, her face pale, her eyes wide with worry. But there was something else. There was a spark in her eyes, a faint glimmer of trust. She had begun to believe that we weren't just there to protect her for a night, but for however long it took. Marcus was asleep, his small head resting on my shoulder, his body still trembling slightly. He had been through too much already, but for now, he was safe. He was in the hands of people who cared. That thought made the ride a little bit easier. As we approached a narrow, unmarked road, Bear signaled for us to slow down. The others fell in line, their motorcycles humming softly as we prepared to take a sharp left. The road here was less traveled, winding through thick trees and jagged rocks. It was the perfect place to stay hidden. We had to stay under the radar. I knew that Forge and the crew had already made arrangements for the safe house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The moonlight barely broke through the canopy above, casting long shadows over the road. Every turn felt like it could be our last, but I knew we couldn't stop now. The house was just ahead, hidden in the woods. It wasn't much, just a small cabin, but it was secure. Forge's connections had made sure of that. As we turned onto the dirt path leading to the cabin, the sound of the engines fell silent. We were almost there. But that's when I heard it, a distant rumble. The sound of an engine, faint but growing louder. My heart sank. I glanced at Diesel, who had been keeping watch in the back. He signaled that he'd heard it too. "We've got company," he said, his voice steady but urgent. I cursed under my breath. We didn't have much time. The safe house was supposed to be our refuge, our moment to breathe, but now it was turning into a target. We weren't the only ones who knew about it. I looked ahead, my gaze locked on Bear, who was already slowing down. "We don't stop," I said, my voice firm. "Not yet." The cabin was just a few hundred yards away. I could see the outline of the building in the distance, the faint glow of lights from inside. But I wasn't sure we could make it there before we were ambushed. I motioned for the others to spread out, creating a perimeter. We couldn't let anyone get too close. The sound of the engines grew louder, and then I saw them. 2 motorcycles, their headlights cutting through the darkness, coming from the opposite direction. They were moving fast. Too fast. I couldn't tell if they were coming for us or if they were just passing by, but I wasn't going to take the chance. We needed to act fast. Bear turned to me, his expression grim. "We've got to get them in there now. We'll deal with them later," he said. I nodded. We couldn't afford to waste time. I gave Marcus one last reassuring glance before I lifted him off my bike. He was still groggy from sleep, but he clung to me as I carried him toward the cabin. Maya followed closely behind, her small hand gripping my sleeve. The rest of the crew stayed behind, their bikes positioned to cover us as we made our way inside. We didn't know how long we had, but I wasn't taking any chances. Inside the cabin, Forge was already waiting for us. His face was grim, but there was a faint smile when he saw Marcus and Maya. "You made it," he said, his voice low. "They're safe." I didn't have time for words. "They won't be for long," I replied. "We've got company. They're closing in on us." Forge's expression darkened. "I'll make the calls," he said, pulling out his phone. "We need to be ready." The rest of the crew came inside, their eyes scanning the room, making sure every exit was covered. I could hear the engines outside, growing louder. They were getting closer. We didn't have long. As the crew got to work, I sat down, my thoughts racing. I kept thinking about the kids, about everything they'd been through, about the life they would never have. But we had to stay focused. We had to keep them safe, for as long as it took. I stood by the window, my eyes scanning the trees that surrounded the cabin. The night was unnervingly quiet, but I knew better than to relax. Every rustle of leaves, every crack in the wood could be the sound of someone creeping closer. I glanced over my shoulder at the rest of the crew. Diesel, Phantom, Crow, and Bear were in the other room, making plans, checking weapons, and preparing for whatever might come through that door. Forge was on the phone, his voice low, his words sharp and deliberate as he worked to secure their next move. We had a brief window of safety, but it was quickly closing. The Serpents had found us once, and I was certain they wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted. I turned my attention back to Marcus and Maya. The two of them were sitting quietly by the small fire in the corner. Maya had finally fallen asleep, her head resting against her brother's shoulder. But Marcus was wide awake, his dark eyes looking past me, staring out the cabin window with a haunted expression. I walked over to him, kneeling down in front of him. "You okay, kid?" I asked softly, trying not to startle him. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he slowly looked up at me, his lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the fear still lingering in his eyes, and I could feel his pain. "Are they going to come after us again?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. My heart clenched at the question. I could see that he was trying to be strong, but I knew he was scared. I had no easy answer for him. The truth was, I didn't know. All I could do was promise him that we would protect him. "We're gonna make sure you're safe," I said firmly. "No one's gonna hurt you again." He nodded, but I could tell that the words didn't bring him much comfort. How could they? He'd been through hell. He had every right to be scared. I stood up and glanced around the room. The rest of the crew was still working, preparing, setting up for what might come next. We had to stay vigilant. If the Serpents were coming, we needed to be ready. Forge hung up the phone, his expression grim. "They've got the town on lockdown," he said, his voice low but steady. "The local police are in on it, and they've got a few guys scattered around the area. If we stay here, we're a sitting duck." "What's the plan then?" I asked, my eyes narrowing. "We head out," Forge said, nodding. "We move the kids first. Get them to the backup location. Then we deal with the rest." I could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of a fight, but he knew the risks. "We can't wait around for them to make their move. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets." I looked at the kids. They were safe here, for now. But I knew Forge was right. The longer we stayed, the more likely it was that the Serpents would find us. And when they did, we'd be out of time. I nodded. "All right, let's get them out of here." We moved quickly. Diesel and Bear took the lead, while Crow and Phantom stayed behind to cover the cabin. Forge and I got the kids ready. Marcus was still holding on to Maya, his small hand wrapped tightly around her arm. It was clear that he wasn't going to let her go, not even for a second. I couldn't blame him. They had been through so much. I crouched down in front of them. "Listen, you two, we're going to get you to a safe place. You just stay close, all right?" I said softly. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes filled with uncertainty, but he nodded. I could see him trying to be brave for his sister. We walked out of the cabin and into the night. The air was crisp, and the stars above gave just enough light to see the road ahead. But we weren't going to be walking much longer. Bear and Diesel were already on their bikes, engines roaring to life, while Crow and Phantom stood guard, their eyes scanning the trees. We made our way to the bikes, and I helped Marcus and Maya onto mine. The engines roared, and we took off, heading down the narrow road, our headlights cutting through the darkness. Every sense was on high alert. I could hear the wind rushing past, the faint sound of tires on gravel, but the silence around us felt unnatural. The stillness of the night felt like a trap. I glanced over my shoulder, making sure the others were still following. We weren't far from the backup location, but we had to make it there without being noticed. The road was empty for now, but I knew that could change in an instant. We rode for miles, the only sounds the hum of the engines and the rustle of the wind. As we neared the safe house, I started to relax. We were almost there, but that's when I saw the headlights. The glow of two vehicles coming fast from behind. My heart dropped into my stomach. We weren't going to make it without a fight. I signaled for the others to speed up. This was it. The Serpents had found us. But we weren't going down without a fight. I could hear the roar of their engines getting closer. The sound echoed in the stillness of the night, a reminder that we were running out of time. I looked ahead, my grip tightening on the handlebars of my bike as the headlights of the two vehicles behind us grew brighter. The Serpents weren't just following anymore, they were closing in. I signaled to Bear, who was riding ahead of me. We had to make a move, and fast. We couldn't let them catch us on this stretch of road. I pushed the throttle harder, my bike roaring to life, the wind rushing past me as I sped forward. Bear and the others followed suit, their engines growling as they matched my speed. Behind us, I could see the glow of their headlights growing larger. They were gaining on us. The road ahead was straight. The only thing separating us from the safe house was a few miles and a sharp bend in the road. I knew the plan, but I wasn't sure we had enough time. We needed a distraction, something to slow them down, to give us a shot at losing them before we hit the safe house. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the first car weaving through the road, its headlights shining like a beacon in the night. The second car wasn't far behind. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my focus. I had to keep the kids safe. I could feel Marcus's small hand clutching my vest tightly, his body pressed against mine, his breathing quick and shallow. Maya was behind me, clinging to the back of the bike, her body tense. They were scared, and I didn't blame them. This was their life now, always looking over their shoulder, always running. I couldn't let this be their future. We were almost there. I could see the outline of the safe house in the distance, a small house nestled in the woods. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. We just had to make it there. The two vehicles were getting closer, and I knew I had to make a move. I pulled to the side of the road, cutting across the gravel, hoping the sudden move would throw them off. It worked. The first car swerved, its tires screeching as it tried to regain control. I took the opportunity, speeding up again, the others following closely behind me. Bear was leading the way now, his bike cutting through the air like a razor. We couldn't afford to be caught in the open. The safe house was just a few more turns away. As we reached the bend in the road, I saw it. The headlights of the second car were still coming, but they were too far back. The distraction had worked. We had a chance. I took the final turn hard, the bike skidding slightly as I leaned into the curve. Bear did the same, his tires barely touching the road as he followed. We were almost there. As we approached the driveway, I could see the rest of the crew waiting by the gate, ready to help us get inside. We couldn't stop yet, but we were close. The gates of the safe house swung open, and we rode through, pulling into the driveway just as the second car reached the turn. We had made it. For now, we were safe. The moment we stopped, the bikes cut off, and the sound of engines died down. The tension in the air was palpable as we dismounted and made our way into the house. The crew was already inside, securing the place. Diesel and Crow were checking the perimeter, while Forge was on the phone, arranging the next steps. I led Marcus and Maya inside, making sure they were settled into a safe room. Maya was still clinging to her brother, her small body trembling, but I could see the relief on her face. They were safe, for now. I had to keep telling myself that. The fight wasn't over. The Serpents were still out there, and we still had a long road ahead of us. But we had time now. Time to plan. Time to regroup. Time to protect these kids, and anyone else who needed us. As I stood by the door, my eyes scanning the surroundings, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I turned to see Bear, his face set with determination. "We're not safe here for long," he said quietly. "They'll find us." "We'll be ready," I said, my voice steady. "We'll take care of them." I couldn't let them hurt Marcus and Maya. I wouldn't let them. We had a moment of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. The Serpents would come, but so would we, and we'd be ready for them. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark road that stretched in front of the cabin. The tension in the air was thick, and I could feel the weight of the night pressing down on me. The safe house had been a brief respite, but now, with the Serpents closing in, I knew it wouldn't be long before we'd have to face them. The quiet hum of the night outside felt almost too peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaos we had just escaped. Inside, the crew was making preparations, checking weapons, and reinforcing the cabin. Diesel was standing guard outside, his eyes scanning the perimeter, while Forge was on the phone, making sure we had every escape route planned out. I looked over at Marcus and Maya. They were huddled together on the couch, the fear still fresh in their eyes, but the relief that came from being out of immediate danger was slowly starting to sink in. Maya clutched her brother tightly, her small hand wrapped around his arm as if she was afraid to let go. I knew they had been through more than any child should have to endure, but for now, they were safe. That's all I could promise them. I turned away from the window and made my way to the others. "How much longer?" I asked Forge. He glanced up, his face hardened with resolve. "They're moving fast. We've got about an hour before they catch up. We need to get them out of here." I nodded, the urgency in his voice pushing me to act. We had to keep moving. "Where are we going?" "There's a place up north," Forge replied, his voice steady. "It's remote, but it's secure. We'll be off the radar there. The Serpents won't find us." I could hear the determination in his voice, but I wasn't so sure. The Serpents were ruthless, and if they knew where we were, it wouldn't matter how remote the location was. "What if they find the cabin?" I asked, my voice low. Forge didn't hesitate. "We've set up a decoy. If they come, they'll think we're still here. We'll be long gone by the time they realize the trap." I could see the plan forming in his mind, but I wasn't convinced. It wasn't the first time we had been on the run, but this time, the stakes were higher. We couldn't afford any mistakes. I turned to Bear, who had been quiet for the past few minutes, his eyes fixed on the door. "We ride out in 15, I said, my voice firm. "Get the kids ready." Bear nodded without a word, and I could see him go to work, rallying the crew. They moved quickly, efficiently, like they had done this 100 times before. But this time felt different. The weight of the responsibility was heavier. We weren't just protecting ourselves. We were protecting the kids. And I couldn't fail them. I walked back over to Marcus and Maya. They were still sitting close together, but I could see the tension in their shoulders. They had been through so much already, and now, we were asking them to run again. Listen, you two, I said, kneeling down in front of them. We're leaving soon. It's not going to be easy, but we're getting you to a safe place. You've got to trust us. Maya looked up at me, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Will we be okay? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right words. We're going to do everything we can to make sure you're safe. No one's going to hurt you again. I promise. She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. I didn't blame her. After everything they had been through, trust wasn't easy. But I had to give her something to hold on to. We were their only chance. I stood up and motioned for them to follow me. The rest of the crew was ready to move. Diesel was already outside, keeping watch, while Crow and Phantom were preparing the bikes. Bear was making sure the kids had everything they needed, their small bags packed with the essentials. I glanced at Forge, who was finishing his call. All set? I asked. As ready as we'll ever be, he replied, his tone serious. I could feel the weight of the moment. We weren't just leaving this cabin. We were leaving behind everything that had come before. The road ahead was uncertain, but it was the only road we had. The Serpents were coming. They wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But we were ready. We had to be. I led the way to the bikes, Marcus and Maya following closely behind. The sound of the engines roared to life as we mounted our bikes, the rumble of the motorcycles cutting through the stillness of the night. It was time to go. As we sped down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The air felt too still, too quiet. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see headlights chasing us. But there was nothing. Just the dark, empty road ahead. We rode in silence, the only sound the hum of the engines beneath us. My thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus and Maya. They had been through so much, and I couldn't let them down. The road was long, but we had to make it. For them. And for ourselves. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as we sped down the road, the headlights of our motorcycles cutting through the night like blades. The world around us was dark, the only light coming from our bikes, the stars barely visible above the canopy of trees. We had been riding for hours, and the silence between us was deafening. The crew was scattered, each of us riding at a distance to avoid detection, but the feeling of being watched was impossible to shake. Every turn we took, every mile we covered, I kept expecting the Serpents to be right behind us. But for now, the road remained empty. My mind kept drifting back to Marcus and Maya. The two of them were exhausted, their bodies slumped against the back of my bike, but they had stayed quiet for most of the ride. I couldn't blame them. They had seen too much, been through too much. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, my heart racing as I watched the dark road behind us. No headlights. No cars. We had a brief window of peace, but I knew it wouldn't last. We had to get to the safe house, and then keep moving. This wasn't over. As we approached a turn, Bear signaled to slow down, and the rest of the crew did the same. We were getting close to the next stop, a place where we could regroup, plan, and hopefully throw off the trail. But just as we slowed, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of engines in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. My heart skipped a beat. They found us. I muttered under my breath, just loud enough for Bear to hear. He didn't respond right away, his eyes fixed ahead, scanning the road. Keep it steady, he finally said, his voice low. They won't catch us if we stick to the plan. But I knew better. The Serpents were relentless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being cornered. I looked back once more, my heart pounding in my chest. The headlights were closer now, getting brighter, and I could see two vehicles coming up fast behind us. I didn't hesitate. We move, I said, signaling to the crew. The engines roared to life as we took off down the road. Faster now, my grip tightening on the handlebars. We weren't just riding to the safe house anymore. We were running, and the Serpents were closing in. I could feel the fear building in my chest, but I didn't have time to let it take hold. Marcus and Maya needed to be safe, and I wasn't about to let anything happen to them. I glanced over at Bear, who was leading the pack now, his bike cutting through the night like a knife. He didn't flinch, didn't break his pace, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. We all knew what was coming. The chase. The fight. But we weren't going to let the Serpents have their way. Not tonight. The road ahead was narrow, winding, and treacherous, but I didn't let off the throttle. The sound of the engines behind us was getting louder, but I pushed harder. We had to break away, Had to find a way to outrun them. We hit the next curve, sharp and tight, and I leaned into the turn, the bike skidding slightly as I pushed it harder. I heard the screech of tires behind me as the first car tried to follow, but it couldn't handle the curve. I grinned, knowing that it wasn't going to be easy for them to keep up. But just as I thought we had a moment, a flash of light blinded me from behind. The second car was gaining. Fast. Too fast. I could feel my heart racing as I made another sharp turn, hoping to throw them off, but I knew we couldn't keep this up forever. I glanced over at Diesel and Phantom, who were riding close behind, their eyes scanning the road for anything that might give us an edge. Take the next exit. I shouted over the roar of the engine, hoping they heard me. Bear looked back, nodding, and signaled for everyone to follow. We veered off the main road, heading down a smaller, less traveled path. It was a gamble, but it was our best shot at losing them. The dirt road was rough, the bumps jarring, but we kept pushing forward. The sound of the engines behind us began to fade, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. We had broken away, but it wasn't over yet. The road was still long, and the Serpents wouldn't give up so easily. As we reached the end of the path, I saw the flicker of headlights in the distance, but this time, they were farther away. We had a few minutes to regroup, to figure out the next move. Bear signaled to stop, and we pulled off the road, stopping at a small, abandoned cabin hidden in the woods. It wasn't much, but it would do for now. We dismounted and started making plans. But I knew that we couldn't stay here long. The Serpents were still out there, and we couldn't let our guard down. I walked over to Marcus and Maya, who had stayed close to the bikes, their eyes wide with fear. "You're safe here," I said, my voice calm, though I could feel the anxiety gnawing at me. "But we need to keep moving. We'll figure this out, together." They nodded, but I could see the worry in their eyes. They were just kids. They shouldn't have to go through this. But as long as I was breathing, I wasn't going to let anyone hurt them again. We were in this together. And together, we'd fight until the end. I leaned against the cabin wall, the chill of the night creeping through the cracks in the wood. The engine's sounds had faded, but the weight of the silence was almost worse. We had managed to break away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The Serpents were relentless, and we had no idea how much time we really had. I glanced over at the kids. Marcus and Maya were sitting together on the ground near the fire, their eyes reflecting the flickering light. Maya was clinging to her brother, her small frame tense, and Marcus, he looked exhausted, but his eyes still had that haunted look, the kind of look that no child should ever have. I could feel the weight of the responsibility bearing down on me. This wasn't just about us anymore. We had to protect them. We had to protect them all. The rest of the crew was busy checking the perimeter, setting up some basic defenses around the cabin, but I knew it wasn't enough. We couldn't stay here for long. The Serpents were closing in, and we couldn't afford to make a mistake. Bear was keeping watch at the front, his broad figure silhouetted against the moonlit trees. Diesel was standing guard near the back, his eyes sharp, scanning every movement in the distance. Crow and Phantom were working on getting the bikes ready in case we needed to leave quickly. The crew was tense, but focused. They knew what was at stake. I couldn't help but feel the weight of their trust on my shoulders. We had been through a lot together, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about surviving another night. This time, it was personal. I walked over to Forge, who was standing near the fire, his hand resting on his gun. He didn't turn as I approached, but I could tell he was deep in thought. "What's the plan?" I asked, my voice low. Forge turned to look at me, his expression serious but calm. "We wait for them to make their move," he said. "We can't outrun them forever, but we can outsmart them. We'll let them think we're here, then we'll strike when they least expect it." "You think they'll bite?" I asked. Forge's lips curled into a small grin. "They'll bite. They think they have us cornered, but they don't know this area like we do." I nodded, the plan making sense. But I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. It was too quiet, too still. It felt like we were just waiting for something to snap. "And the kids?" I asked, my eyes shifting toward Marcus and Maya. "They're staying here for now," Forge said. "We can't risk taking them out until we're sure it's safe. But we'll keep them hidden. No one will get to them. Not on our watch." I glanced back at the kids. Maya had her head resting on Marcus's shoulder, her eyes closed. Marcus was staring into the fire, his small hands clenched into fists. He was trying to stay strong, but I could see the fear in him. I could see it in his eyes. And I hated it. No kid should have to be this scared. I walked over to them, crouching down in front of Marcus. "Hey, little man," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. "You good?" He didn't look up at first, but then he met my eyes. His gaze was full of uncertainty, but he nodded. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Just tired." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. He didn't have to say anything else. I could feel it, the exhaustion, the fear. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I couldn't let them face it alone. "We're not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm. "You're safe here." He nodded again, but this time, it was different. It was a small, quiet sign of trust. I could see it in his eyes. He was starting to believe us. But I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. The serpents were still out there. We had to be ready. I stood up, walking back to the others. Bear was still watching the road, his eyes scanning the darkness. Diesel was checking the bikes again, making sure everything was ready for a quick departure. Crow and Phantom were reinforcing the perimeter, making sure we weren't caught off guard. We were all in position, waiting for the inevitable. And then, the sound came. The unmistakable rumble of engines. Not just one, but several. I turned to Forge, my hand on the gun at my side. "Here we go," I said, my voice steady. Forge nodded, his face hardening. "Everyone, get in position," he ordered. The crew moved quickly, taking their places around the cabin, setting up for the fight. I glanced at Marcus and Maya one last time, making sure they were out of sight. We couldn't let them get caught in this. The serpents were closing in fast. We didn't have much time. I pulled my helmet down over my head, feeling the weight of it settle on my shoulders. This was it. We were going to fight, and we were going to win. I could feel the tension building in the air as we waited, the sound of the engines growing louder. The serpents were almost here, but we were ready. We had to be. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy as the rumble of engines grew louder. The serpents were closing in, and the quiet night that had seemed so peaceful just hours ago was now filled with the hum of impending danger. The crew had already taken their positions, everyone ready for what was about to happen. We had prepared as much as we could, but in the end, it would all come down to how fast we moved and how well we stayed together. I glanced at Marcus and Maya one last time. They were huddled together in the corner of the cabin, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. I could see the strain in their expressions, the exhaustion of a life they never should have known. But we were here, and we would protect them. That was the only thing that mattered now. Bear was at the front, keeping an eye on the road through the cracked window. He had his hand on his gun, his jaw clenched, waiting. Diesel and Phantom were positioned around the cabin, their eyes scanning the dark woods. Crow was at the back, watching the shadows for any movement. Everyone knew the plan. We weren't going to let the serpents get close enough to hurt the kids. We would fight if we had to, but the goal was to make sure they stayed safe. The sound of the engines grew louder, and I felt a cold chill creep up my spine. I checked my gear one last time, making sure the gun was secured and the knife was within reach. Forge was standing in the corner, his eyes glued to the phone in his hand, waiting for any news, any intel. "It's almost time," he muttered under his breath. I nodded, trying to calm my nerves. We had done this before. We had faced danger, survived fights, and lived through the worst. But tonight was different. The stakes were higher. The serpents weren't just a rival gang. They were out for revenge, and they would stop at nothing to get it. I motioned for Bear to check in. He nodded and whispered, "They're close. Too close." I could feel my heart rate picking up. "Get ready," I said quietly, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. We couldn't afford to make a sound, not yet. The serpents had to be within striking distance before we made our move. Every second felt like an eternity. We couldn't afford to be too hasty. If we attacked too soon, we'd risk drawing attention. But if we waited too long, it would be too late. The sounds of their engines grew louder, closer. I could hear the tires skimming over the gravel road, the vibrations shaking the floor beneath me. Bear made a signal, and everyone fell into position. The cabin was silent except for the faint sound of breathing. The crew was ready. We were as prepared as we could be, but I knew there was no way to predict how this would go. We had to adapt on the fly. I turned to the kids one last time, my heart heavy with the weight of what they had been through. "Stay here," I said, my voice steady, but my heart aching. "We'll keep you safe. You have to trust us." Maya nodded, her small hand still gripping Marcus's arm. Marcus gave me a small, quiet smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was trying. I could tell, but the fear was still there, buried deep inside him. I couldn't blame him. I wouldn't be able to trust anyone either if I were in his shoes. The engines of the Serpents cars finally came to a halt just outside. My pulse quickened, and I signaled to the crew. It was time. We had to move fast. I stepped to the front, ready to fight, ready to protect. The door creaked open, and I could see the headlights of their vehicles shining through the trees. They had arrived. The Serpents. But we were ready. We wouldn't go down without a fight. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for what was to come. We would hold our ground, no matter what. We would protect Marcus and Maya. We would protect our family. This was our fight. This was our stand. The door creaked open, and the sound of footsteps approaching made my heart race. The Serpents were just outside, and the crew was ready. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. We had no more time to waste. The first step was critical. If we didn't act fast enough, we'd be fighting a losing battle. I turned to Bear, who was standing guard by the door. His hand rested on his gun, his eyes sharp and alert. "Let them come," he said, his voice steady, though I could sense the underlying tension. I nodded, silently agreeing. This was it. The Serpents had found us. They were closing in, and we were ready to fight. I looked back at Marcus and Maya, who were huddled together in the corner, their eyes wide with fear, but full of hope. They trusted us. We had to make sure that trust was not misplaced. The sound of their engines grew louder as they neared the cabin. I could hear the tires on gravel, the hum of their vehicles cutting through the night. They were getting closer. I motioned to the crew. It was time to take action. "Move out," I called out, and we all moved into position, each one of us taking our place around the cabin. The moment the door was kicked open, we would be ready. The first wave of Serpents burst into the clearing, their guns drawn. I didn't hesitate. I raised my own weapon, the adrenaline pushing me forward as I fired the first shot. The sound of gunfire rang through the air, a sharp contrast to the stillness of the night. The first Serpent dropped, but they kept coming. There were more of them, and they were better armed, but we had the element of surprise. Diesel and Phantom moved fast, taking down the next two. The Serpents were disoriented, trying to regroup, but we were already on top of them. Bear led the charge, his massive form cutting through the darkness like a bulldozer, taking out another two with quick, efficient shots. I could feel the power in every move we made, the unity that came from years of being in the field together. We were a well-oiled machine, and we were fighting for something bigger than ourselves. I glanced over at Forge, who was standing at the back, making sure the kids were safe. He gave me a quick nod, letting me know they were secure. That was all I needed to hear. I focused back on the fight. The Serpents were starting to regroup, but they weren't ready for this. They weren't ready for us. I could hear one of them shouting orders, but it didn't matter. They were losing ground fast. Another wave came charging toward us, but we held our ground. Crow was behind them, picking off the ones trying to sneak up from the back. We were in control now. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of gunpowder, but we didn't stop. We couldn't. The Serpents were trying to retreat, but it was too late. Bear took out the last of them with a quick shot, and the clearing fell silent. My heart was still racing, but we had won. The Serpents were down. We had protected Marcus and Maya. We had done what we set out to do. I lowered my weapon, looking around the clearing. The crew was gathering, checking the fallen Serpents to make sure they were all down. Diesel and Phantom were already moving to secure the perimeter, while Bear checked the cabin for any signs of trouble. Forge was the first to approach me, his face grim but relieved. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice low. "For now," I replied, my eyes scanning the area. "But we'll have to move again. The Serpents will come after us." He nodded. "We'll be ready. We always are." I looked back at the cabin, where Marcus and Maya were still hiding. I could see the fear starting to fade from their eyes. They were safe, for now, and that was all that mattered. We had fought for them. We had protected them. And we had won. As the crew gathered around, we began to make plans for the next move. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we had a chance. We would keep moving, keep fighting, and we would make sure no one hurt Marcus and Maya again. We were family, and nothing would break that bond.